Hi everyone, this video is the first in a series of videos in which I talk astrology with my sister Mary Jo. In this first video, we talk about bodybuilding champion, movie star, and once California governor Arnold Schwarzenegger through the lens of his astrology chart. We both saw the recently released Netflix series about Arnold, and we were struck by the numerous astrological correlations reflecting his character and especially the timing of many important events in his life. We hope you'll find our dialogue informative and entertaining. All right, so here we have Arnold Schwarzenegger's chart. I think we're both tuning into this because we both had a chance to see the Netflix biographical of his life recently. And I remember watching it while looking at the chart and being struck by how many correlations I could see, not only in his cycles as the planets were moving and the things that were happening, but also reflections of his character. So how did that work for you?
Well, I actually watched the series and then went back to look for his chart. I had seen it years ago, but looked at it anew. And I was definitely struck by, because there's so much information coming from him personally too, not just about his life events, that I was struck by how he has lived out his chart. Specifically, if you just look at the sun in Leo, and then Saturn and Pluto nearby in Leo. In the second house, the incredible self-confidence he has and charisma, and how he's been attracted to competitions, whether it was bodybuilding, and then later on, I guess you don't always attribute that to Leo, the sun in Leo, but definitely very comfortable in the limelight, whether in his early part of his life with bodybuilding or later as an actor and then as a politician.
Right.
Yeah. So
Yeah, no, very true. Yeah, that's absolutely true that you see those patterns reflected in his natal aspects, because the competition, yes, Leo is the natural fifth sign, and on that alone you're into competing and you're into just showmanship and of course that links to acting as well. The idea of performing is very
yes,
leonine.
yeah.
And this is increased further when you see Eris appear in the 10th, which is a place that you look up to and you, in a sense, seek to become. You worship it almost. And it's part of a T-square. So Eris opposes Neptune and then in square to the moon, and the moon rules his ascendant. So now you're in self-image and wanting to be something, wanting to project something, which is further emphasized by Mercury rising in Cancer, Venus in Cancer as well, and the Jupiter, adding to your comment about competitions, because it's in the fifth sign, which is the sign that you would say the natural fifth is Leo, and so now it's occupied by Jupiter, but Jupiter is where your joy is and your talents are and so forth. So definitely fits the approach that he took, first and foremost to reach for the Eris and Aries, which tends to be a very physical sign in any case. And the idea that with bodybuilding, it seems like it's partly martial, and remember Mars rules the 10th too, but I would also say bodybuilding has a Venusian, you're trying to project beauty, the perfect muscle, whatever, structure, muscle, alignment, arrangement, whatever. So all of that, yes, it fits very much with what the chart says about it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And on top of that, you look at the sun in the second house and how he grew up very modestly, but was started to make money quite early in his career, not just in bodybuilding competitions, but then working with some of his mentors in that industry. And then he went into real estate even before he went into acting, or around the same time. And he has made a lot of money not through all of his endeavors. It's been a big focus, which you often see with people with sun in the second house. It's might start off as a security thing, but then it becomes just a thing.
Yes.
And on top of that, the Jupiter in the fifth house trining that Mercury on the ascendant is, that to me is someone who has an easier time accessing his Jupiter.
Yes.
Mercury than the average person. So, and you hear it in that documentary. He keeps talking about how hard he worked, and he did, but he also mentions vision a lot. I had a big vision. I had that, and that's Jupiter.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
very true. Very true. And Jupiter trine Mercury, insight, intelligence, literally. The thing about Arnold is that, yes, he may be, the thick Austrian accent, but he just seems like a really sharp guy. That's the
Yeah.
truth. He knows his
Yeah.
stuff. Anything he's gone into, he figures it out and he does well at it. And
Yes.
when you think bodybuilding and then you go into making movies and then you go into politics, those are three pretty different
Yeah.
categories, even if you can link them through the
Mhm.
energies of a chart. Good Lord, I mean that takes some serious courage.
Oh, and real estate. He's made a lot of money
Yes,
in real
true. They're
estate.
over here, the real estate and
Yeah.
the Cancer. Cancer is the natural sign of
Mhm.
real estate. And if you notice that, first of all, the assistance from Jupiter to Mercury, Mercury is connected to the IC, which is one of his home bases, the other one being Libra. And Libra, first of all, it involves the T square for the drive, and Venus connects to Libra. So, yeah, you can see why he would pretty naturally connect to real estate and invest and make money from it, which is apparently what he did during one period of his life. Yes,
Right. And
very
you had
true.
mentioned that the Saturn cycle lines up really well with all the stages of his career. What was
It
that
does,
again?
yeah. So okay, so the Saturn cycle. This is really fascinating because Saturn in its 30-year cycle. So it's born there, and then as it's circulating in this direction, spending about 2.5 years per sign, moving like this, and then it was in here. He was still a teenager. So you're a teenager when Saturn is opposite itself. You're 14,
Mhm.
15. And
Mhm.
already by his late teens, he is getting better and better at this quest of bodybuilding. And when he's already winning
Mhm.
some contests and so on. And it was by the time Saturn reaches the pinnacle of the chart, so the MC up here and then the 10th, the zenith, is mid 60s when he's starting to already be successful and win prizes, and he's literally becoming known. This is classic astrology in that wherever the Saturn is transiting tends to be the clock of your life where things are happening, and
Mhm.
you could call it your karma, you could call it your doing, it's all the same thing. So then what you notice is he spends that period from the mid 60s until roughly the mid 70s. That's what spans from in here all the way to Cancer. And it was when Saturn reaches Cancer, the sign of his ascendant, mid 70s, he decides he's going to quit because he's won multiple years in a row and he's had enough. He did do one more in
Mhm.
1980. He won another Mr. Olympia or some such thing, but it was almost like an afterthought. He was no longer into that because he had already started to do movies, which was his next venture, which
Mhm.
starts in the mid 70s. Pretty quickly, he starts to do different movies. Although, by the way, notice to me it's very interesting that the main thing he's known for is action heroes, action people, action
Mhm.
figures, and
Yeah.
that would be it's a classic for Aries. Aries is an action-oriented, the idea of
Yeah.
a warrior, like when he played Terminator, things like that. That's
Right.
very
Right.
Aryan, right? So now the thing with the Saturn, though, is that what's really interesting is he goes on this movie journey, and without going into too much detail, go a whole cycle like this, and it
Mhm.
takes you to 2003, when after a full 30 years, right, of
Mhm.
exploring something that actually lasted longer than his bodybuilding in that sense. So, of course, other things were happening, but that was the main career thing. Here is where, in 2003, he now goes on to become the California governor. And
Right.
that's the years that he spent. The first part of that, Saturn was transiting through the ascendant and through his Leo planets, and it was hard for him, as you would expect, when Saturn is doing its thing. And then he improved, because that's, I think, one of his great qualities, that he's a Republican governor. I wish Republicans were like this,
Yeah,
because he is the classic centrist,
yeah,
in his view, and he listens to the people that he is supposed to be leading, which is what a
right,
true leader does, right? So yeah, bottom line, the Saturn cycles are incredibly descriptive of
right.
his life, and following upon from that would be Saturn now is going this way, so now it's all the way up here. So you would surmise, I mean, he's 76, and yet with this guy, there's a possibility of a fourth act here, because
Hmm.
the next 10 plus years
Hmm.
are, it's in the public domain. It's going through here, all the way down like that. So for quite
Yeah.
a while, it's going to be in Pisces, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, etc.
It might be something to do with climate change. I know that's an issue that um, he's very concerned about climate change, and he did a few, important initiatives when he was governor, and I know
Mm.
he talks about it, but who knows? I do think that the Netflix documentary could be part of it in a way, because it's like a culmination thing where he goes through his entire life. But you're right, he's not he seems to be still fairly strong for his age.
Hmm.
So maybe he does do something else. Yeah. But it is interesting that so the Mars rules the 10th, which is career, your career, your public persona. And so, of course, the action star makes sense. The bodybuilder makes sense. Even, the kind of roles, like you say, he got in acting. But also, even the politician makes sense because it's in the 12th house, which is often, well, it is the house of service, public service.
Yes.
That's 6/12 axis. So even the fact that he would be attracted to politics, you can see that from his moon in Capricorn in the 7th house, definitely a politician chart. Maybe
Yes.
the Mercury rising, the Venus rising, but that Mars actually also explains
Yes.
public
Yes.
service.
Yeah, very much. And I mean, actually, the Mars links the 10th, which is the reputation, the place of your career. It also rules Scorpio, the 5th. So that's the competition
Yeah,
part of the chart, the 5th. And probably the idea of running an election and winning would have been very appealing to him, because he'd be in this,
yeah,
game thing. And so, yeah, it
yeah.
makes sense. And by the way, now that you say that, there's a rather interesting thing here, in that if you take this chart, this is for Graz, Austria, where he was born, and it's always the
Mhm.
dominant chart. Nevertheless, though, if you do the chart for California, where he's been most of his life in terms of his impact, as governor there, doing movies, etc., the
Yeah,
chart completely flips over, because you travel from Europe all the way, the west part of the US, and you get the
right.
opposite, Capricorn rising, which actually, in some ways, is even more descriptive of what he did as a politician in
Yes,
California. And it focalizes the moon on his ascendant, so all the Cancer planets go to the 7th and so forth. So this is
right.
a very interesting thing from the locality. I notice locality charts like this can be very revealing in showing
Yeah,
you the kind of thing you're doing in that part of the world.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, that's a very interesting
yeah. Here we've got him at this age, but here's what he was like when he was.
And he was I mean, he still is in some ways, but he was a very attractive man. And that's also the Venus on the ascendant. You see that a lot when people have Venus hovering around the ascendant.
That's true. That's true.
There's
Yes.
often some, nice beauty until,
Yeah. Very
but,
true.
let's go into some of the interesting so he had had one brother whom he talks about and they describe in the Netflix documentary.
Yes. Yes.
Died
Yes. Yes.
tragically. His brother died at the age of 24 in a drunk driving accident. I
Here,
believe he was
there's
drunk.
the two of
Oh,
them in the
yeah, they
picture.
look alike. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting because it is seen in the chart, the transits at the time,
Yes. Yes, it
right?
is. Yeah. I highlighted here the time when it took place in the ephemeris, and that what it does is it shows you the Uranus. So okay, so Uranus was transiting through Libra, and you immediately point to the Neptune in the fourth as
Mhm.
a familial type of energy, because the fourth is the family. So already indirectly, the idea of something happening that would be potentially challenging, from a Uranus cycle, because Uranus comes from the 12th, and
Conjunct
Uranus
Mars too, so
conjunct
that's,
Mars and square the MCIC. So a planet like that can deliver a shock around family matters. And furthermore, you could also say Uranus in Gemini. Gemini is the natural sign of siblings as well, and also the sign of cars, spookily enough. And and the fact Uranus comes together with Neptune. Neptune is what you would associate with something to do with drinking or escaping, which is what happened to his brother. He was intoxicated, and he died in a car crash. And so that would have been, I can presume that it would have been a shocking event in his life.
right, and that Neptune's a little complicated. It squares his moon and
Yes.
opposes Uranus, so it's,
True. Yeah,
it's
very
influenced
true.
on Uranus. Uranus is a little complicated too.
Yeah, I mean, this
so
is the thing. One of the ways to understand T-squares is when planets go through those points in the chart, and the Uranus would be here, they turn on the tension of the T-square, which separately can be very useful to you to move forward in your life. When transits are going through there, it's still useful. It's just that it's almost too useful, or too, it's demanding. Things that happen can
Well,
be.
that's a tragedy. I mean, that's really
Yes.
sad, yeah.
Exactly.
He also had some health issues in the late 90s. He had that heart valve that he had to, which he covers also in the documentary, where he had to have a heart valve, I think, replaced. I don't know what they did. I mean, a cardiologist would laugh at my description, but it was serious. It was a very serious heart issue. And of course, Leo rules the heart, and yes, Saturn, Pluto in the, nearby. So you potentially have that. But what was the transit happening
That
at the
was
time?
that was
Uranus opposite the
Uranus was
sun.
in early Leo, and Neptune was not too far away. They were transiting in the same vicinity. So the Uranus was opposing the Sun. So that fits really well with, once again, when you're looking at where the planets come from. So the Uranus over here, you mentioned the public service of the 12th. That's true. The other thing is that it's the hospital house. It's the 12 and 6 are the health houses. And notice Uranus, you can associate also to Aquarius, which is a place where you get surgeries and interventions like that. So because it's come around and it's opposing the Sun, that's a possibility. And the
In
Sun,
the eighth house too. The eighth house
the
is
eighth, exactly, the place that it, right. And the Sun is your heart, Leo. The Leo is the sign of the heart, right? So and also I believe, although it might have been when Saturn was in Aries from the spring of '96 until the spring of '99. But I bet you anything that, I believe it was earlier. It was in '97 or around that. But I bet he was probably working on his heart and being. Saturn, when it goes through the early degrees of Taurus, will challenge his Leo planets, and so that would be like the post-operation worry or something like that. But in terms of the event, yeah, the Uranus is the main actor in that particular case.
Right.
Yeah. So, let me see here. What else is there? In fact, the late '90s transit was definitely that was the first heart issue, because he's had, I think you mentioned it, right, that he was born with a valve that his heredity was such that it was weaker, right? Or had a,
Which is kind of surprising given how, if you think of, just goes to show you what he overcame to do all that weightlifting, and he made it that far until he needed an intervention.
Right.
So it's pretty, but I guess we could get to I mean, there's crises in everybody's lives, but one of the more public ones that he talks about in the documentary is how his marriage fell apart because he had a son with a housekeeper. And then once it was discovered, which was years after, I think 8 or 10 years after the boy was already around, his wife, Maria Shriver, found out, and then the marriage ended in 2011. I mean, Yeah, that's when they split up, 2011. So I did think it was interesting that Jupiter is his fifth house, play, romance, fun, and children, rules his sixth, which is literally your household help. And he ended literally having a child.
Yeah, the Jupiter,
Not
that's right.
everybody does it this graphically, but
Yeah,
but he
Jupiter,
did.
that's right. Jupiter is the ruler of the servants.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's funny, not funny, but it is what happened, and that
Yeah,
is
it
how
is.
it
Yeah,
ended.
and and by the way, this was a classic uh, poetry of astrology on the dark side because I'm sure he didn't enjoy it, and neither would have his wife. I mean, it would be a really horrible situation for all kinds of reasons. But according to the record, it was he learned about where the situation was. There were probably some some prelude of some kind that he probably might have felt it coming to an extent. But the main thing is the day that his wife confronted him was at the therapist's office, and on that day, if you put where the planets were, which I did in here, it's January 4th, 2011, so they're up here in the ephemeris, and you see that there was a new moon in Capricorn, which is the sign of his marriage. And it's the classic thing for being at a therapist. And then you see Mars right on the angle, to get like the anger and you're like, something really
Right.
confronting you. And not just that, then you see that Pluto was already transiting through the T square because Pluto, you see it at 5, it goes to 7, backtracks, comes back to 5. It's working this T square. So that's basically a potential major problem. And you could even add, it's in the marriage house, but Pluto comes from Leo in the chart. So that doubles down on the
Yes.
child theory or the child motif, the child
Right. And the
imagery.
affair. Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
the other thing that was going on was, let's see, so okay, so Saturn, look where Saturn is, right? Saturn is at 17 degrees Libra. That's perilously close to his Mercury. And it's a familial matter, it's a
Yeah.
square. Again, very unpleasant
There.
to have
Yeah.
Saturn there. Now, remember,
Yeah.
why is all this happening? Because he set this up from many years before. I always remind people of this about charts. A lot of what happens, 80% or more in our lives, we do things and then things come back. Don't say my fate did this
Right.
to me. Your fate is whatever you're doing,
Yeah.
and then it comes back. So,
Oh, that Jupiter was expressed in his life in so many other
oh,
positive
of course,
ways.
of course, of course, yeah,
Yeah, and to be fair, what I liked about the documentary is that he took full responsibility once he had to, of course,
yes,
and he really did not want the son to suffer because of his mistake, and he's really been a good father to him. And apparently, the son is friends with his half brothers also, and sisters, and so yeah, but you're right. It was a choice that he made that it ricocheted. The karma came back, right?
yeah, no, exactly, yeah. It came back, and it came back here. It's the confrontation, but there's also that Jupiter Uranus around the time of the event when this happened. We're next to the MC because you can see up here Uranus at 27 and Jupiter
Right.
27. So they're just a little past. They're very elevated near the MC, and then if the record is correct, that when I researched, it was when Uranus moved into Aries a little bit later, because you can see it here, moves into Aries. It was in this range here when he announced it to the world, which is another blow because it's squaring the moon, and it has
Yeah.
the flavor of scandal and oh my God, look what Arnold did. Because remember, he was coming off
Well, it
8
was
years
a
of
pretty
being
big scandal.
yeah, no, and he
Yeah.
was coming off 8 years of being a governor, and suddenly there's this thing, and so
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was not a good thing,
And
but
apparently, Maria demanded that he tell the children and his children with Maria, the four of them.
oh my,
And so, yeah, I can't believe that he was in a really comfortable place at that time. And he expresses regret. I think for all of the talk about his womanizing, which was probably true. And remember when he was running for governor and a lot of women came out and said he did this, he groped me, this and that, which I think also is explained by Eris in the 10th, with that complicated opposition and square. But beyond that, you can sense that, Maria really, he really loved her, that he loved his family life, and that he even feels like he misses it. That's from him, his own words, and that, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but from the documentary. So yeah, I can't believe that he would have been comfortable. That would definitely not be
Right, right. Well, I mean,
a
that's the
great
thing, though,
place.
that the odds that, I mean, this is, you could say this is a bit of fateful astrology that way, that 20% or whatever number you want to assign to the things that you can almost surmise, predict at age
Mhm.
zero. If you have the ruler of the seventh sign, Saturn, next to Pluto, you can kind of anticipate there's going to be a debacle in there somewhere that the
There
person is
might be,
supposed
yeah,
to learn
yeah.
and transform from. And it's curious that at the
Mhm.
time, both planets are really active, in the chart.
Yes,
To their
yeah.
I mean, the Saturn is the classic thing that if Saturn is connected to your marriage house and Saturn at the time of whatever is squaring a key planet, well, then be prepared for dealing with something. Now, of course, does this mean every person deals with this? No, of course not.
No, it
Hopefully
could have been
not.
something else. And
Yeah,
at the same time, Pluto was hovering around that T square and the over the moon
yeah.
that is in its seventh house. So yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of activity.
It's a
Yeah.
lot of activity, so it becomes like
Yeah.
a seminal moment. I noticed here that when I was researching it, early 2018, he had another very serious heart thing, a heart intervention, which he actually says caused him a lot of trouble. In that, when it was over, it took quite a while for him to recover his energy. He said he had trouble breathing,
Hmm.
and there I noticed that 2018 is a period where the Saturn at that time was just entering Capricorn. And so 2018, this means that from Capricorn, as it's moving in the early degrees, it does a 150 to his sun. And that's another
Yes.
classic health type of angle. And he experienced it in spades because it caused him a lot of pain. He said it was
Wow.
very,
Yeah.
very challenging. I think Taurus also was, or Uranus was entering Taurus as well. So I don't know that it was directly related to his sun by degree, but this is where you often see if a person experiences something like this, then they remain shaken up for a period, and you could correlate it to the
Hmm.
Uranus Saturn because post the operation, the Uranus continues to be square. So you can imagine he would have been extra careful and wondering,
Yeah.
is this it
Yeah.
and so forth, because those things would probably scare you, when you
Well,
experience.
especially as you get older, absolutely. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
But I
exactly.
mean, he's had a huge life. And so he's a great example of someone who really applies the Saturn and the Jupiter in his chart. Admittedly, the Jupiter probably has easier access to the Saturn, a little more complicated. It's conjunct Pluto near his sun,
Hmm.
but he really worked, no pun intended, the Saturn
Yes.
and the Jupiter. And he talks about it. He always talks about, I worked really hard, but I had this vision. And then I would, dream, a bigger vision. That's the Jupiter.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, no, and by the way, I mean, this is the thing to realize just on very direct, basic astrology. Saturn has a bad reputation. Most people would say, "Oh, I don't want it in the second house. That's gonna, in some way, limit my money." Pfft, not at all. If you're
Not at
working,
all. No,
this
yeah.
becomes matter of fact. I mean, you could point to the fact that Pluto can be very enriching. It's known to have connections to great wealth. So there's that. But even so, Saturn
Yeah.
Pluto wouldn't be your first choice. Putting it in a house, that wouldn't be the first choice. But because of his work ethic, which he always felt from a young age, I mean, think about what it would take to have a vision where which he did. He was constantly imagining himself being a great bodybuilder and being famous, but the amount of work that it took because it's
Right.
relentless. By the way, that's a segue to something very specialized, but quite interesting in the astrology. There are these things called harmonics, where you look at special aspects between planets, how far away they are from each other. And the seventh harmonic is related to inspiration and to the idea of the person romanticizing the two planets and seeking to bring them together to express
Mhm.
what they mean. And in Arnold's case, he has Mars and Saturn almost
Mm,
exactly in seventh harmonic. Mars Saturn is the classic weightlifters
yes.
energy because it's the idea Saturn, I'm going to discipline the Mars and make something of it, make something powerful and beautiful and all of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's
So it's
interesting.
that adds that fine point that I think is quite interesting in terms of his.
And just something I'm seeing now that he also married a Kennedy who I'm guessing she's got somebody too. They all seem to have trust funds. And that's kind of interesting because Saturn rules the seventh.
Yeah,
And
that's true. Yeah, that's true.
yeah,
Yeah, marrying
and
into money.
Saturn Pluto explains how he married a very famous and rich woman, but he's the one that made a ton of money himself. And he even talks in the documentary about how there were times when he wasn't getting the roles he wanted, and he just went back to real estate. He just kept grinding away until the other roles showed up, which eventually they did.
Yeah, that's fascinating. About speaking of roles, I have some notes here that his one of his big crises, which isn't really a big deal in the general sense, not even close to those other things with his brother and
Yeah.
but there was this movie released in '93, Last Action Hero, and it was a
Mhm.
total flop. And from what I read, he was really upset. People were calling him, and he had been doing so well, and then all of a sudden he was getting really pressed. Like it was voted to be one of the worst movies of the year and things like that. So he experienced that, and at the time, Saturn. What was happening was Saturn had just entered Pisces here, but then it was due to still go back to Aquarius,
Mhm.
and so as a result of that, it goes back to the sign opposite your sun, and even when it's far away from your sun, just being on the other side of your sun is always
Yeah.
risky in terms of something going wrong, and people, turning against you. But it
Yeah.
didn't last all that long because within a very short period of time, he was already doing other movies that were successful and he felt better. But apparently, he had a big crisis then.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even in very big lives, there, of course, are down moments, and it's also how you handle them. But the point is, he worked just through everything, which is, to me, someone who has a good relationship to Saturn, to their Saturn.
Yeah, no, that's that. Yeah, 100%, 100%. In that Saturn, as I understand it, is in most pure sense the planet of focus and work. And
Hmm.
there is a very real sense in which if a person is looking for the meaning of life, there's something very Saturnian about it because there's something related to the idea that you work with your limitation to the best of your ability. There's a sense in which
Yeah.
being born at all is a contraction to begin with, and then it's how well you contract your energy, which is your focusing energy, your work energy. And people that have a good attitude to that are literally blessed because it solves so
Mhm.
many problems. It means that, for example, he is not going to be phased by a setback. He just keeps moving, And he said that
Right.
he's driving that truck in the series, and saying it's his toy, and he's talking about how, yeah, the whole thing is just have a vision, but keep moving, keep going, keep,
Yeah.
trying things. Which I guess it helps him to have cardinal. He has uh, cardinal rising, Mercury, Venus cardinal, Neptune
Hmm.
cardinal, and then Moon and Eris. So there's a lot of cardinality in the chart, even though he's a Leo, because Leo would be fixed energy, which might get stuck in one place, but his cardinality would help him. But even so, there's no guarantee that a person will be this focused,
Right.
let's say, the way he
Yeah.
was. So
Yeah, absolutely. So he's an interesting chart to look at because he's lived already, quite a few years. He's about to turn 76, and he's been very successful. And now we already knew a lot about him, but with this special, there's dates and there's um, sort of a chronology of everything. And I would say that, he really exemplifies someone who is really working the Jupiter, working the Saturn, which brings results.
yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. The two key forces, contracting and expanding. You could say work and play. This is the thing. A person
Mhm.
could be great at working and then they play too hard and then they might get health problems, so they might get other things happening. So the balance of those two forces is the key to everything. And I think he's done a pretty remarkable job. Yeah, by no means can you say this person is some kind of perfect individual. That's not the point. The point is that
No, no,
he's
yeah,
showing you, through his living his life in a certain way and experiencing the setbacks like any person will experience at certain points, but just continuing and achieving in different areas. And I would not be surprised, like I was saying earlier, to see him do a fourth act, because another thing that is happening is in his lunation, the moon and sun are currently down here. It's a new moon basically that he's
and
in.
you mean it's progressed new,
Yeah,
he's
the
having a
progressed,
progressed
yes, the
moon,
progressed
yeah.
chart. So that tends to be always when the moon is new, people change directions. It's similar to the Saturn cycle. When Saturn returns, big chapter
Right,
closes, something else starts. Here you've got the sun and moon, and it could be what you said, because it's interesting that the climate environmental axis is 3-9, and it is really well set up for him that way. In that Virgo, in a way, even better than having Gemini. The pure 3-9 would be Gemini Sagittarius, but Virgo is often very environmental. There are people that, for instance, are involved in sustainable agriculture, things like that. And
yeah.
Pisces is very visionary and looks for what benefits everyone and so forth. And so Saturn going through there during these 3 years could very well point
Yeah.
to a climate that would be good. I would
Yeah,
say.
well, whatever he does, I'm sure he'll make his mark. He's very good at it.
Yeah, and I'm just seeing too, isn't it interesting that in the cycles, Uranus is in Taurus, Saturn's in Pisces, Neptune and Saturn will enter his 10th together.
Wow.
And so that suggests to me, yeah, for sure, something else is likely to be manifested through him, because Neptune up here, and he could have used it in his past. Not that he didn't do well; he did tremendously well. But Neptune up
Right.
here is the classic aspect or the classic transit for a film star or someone that is projecting themselves out there. So that's what's
Well, it could also be for someone working in a nonprofit kind of, or
that's
in
true.
a
That's true.
humanitarian kind of way. So that would fit that too. I mean, he's the kind of person who, may even be getting, he could from a President Biden or some other president get a special uh, something to do. He already did when with with George W. Bush. Remember, he was
Yes.
so he could, but whatever he does, he's likely to leave, to leave a big mark because he does have a big vision.
Yeah. No, that's true. I mean, notice
Yeah,
this guy, even in recent years, he was very direct in knowing that he reaches a lot of people because he's famous.
yeah,
So he'll just put himself on camera, and I've seen videos of him where he's, adamantly opposite to Trumpism because he's explaining this is not the way you do it.
right.
And I noticed that he's also taken up the anti-Semitic cause because he's from that part of the world where his family literally experienced it and so on. And so you can sense that he feels it, but he does what I would call the responsible thing, which is always the way you
Right.
want a public servant or anybody that wants to influence people, you want them to behave in this way. In
Yeah.
contrast to modern figures, that they'll go nameless, I guess, for now, but I can think
Yes.
of a
Yeah.
few where you think, holy Lord, I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Can't
No,
you have
he
something else
doesn't
to do?
seem to me, Arnold Schwarzenegger seems to me like someone with integrity. Like he wouldn't he wouldn't sell himself out. That's
Right.
uh, yeah. So
Yeah.
that fits.
Yeah, no, I have this thing here that how, look, stinkers that he was nominated for. So 4 times, worst supporting actor, worst actor, and so multiple times. It didn't just happen in 93.
Right.
In fact, here you could see that, I didn't read anything about this, but in 99, there Saturn is squaring his sun.
Right.
So you could see why that would have been another setback of sorts. And by 2004, Saturn was in over his Cancer planets and then getting to his Leo planets. And that's another thing that Saturn can correlate with because, Saturn doesn't always give you happy news. And in fact, sometimes with Saturn, I think it
No.
trains you to accept some bad news and work with it and improve yourself from there. And here you see the list of all these things that he was doing in the 60s. You see him winning all kinds of things. And in 75 was his last, right as Saturn was entering the ascendant in those years, was his last major title. He did one more in 1980 there, but as I said, it was mostly an after effect here already.
Well, I mean, even any competitor, they're going to have losses, and they're going to have, a movie star is going to have movies that aren't well received and all of that. But overall, he achieved what he went out to achieve, which was to become a well-known movie star, despite not changing his name, which I'm sure lots of people told him to.
Yeah. I mean, you think of it, man, it's almost an unfortunate name. So, but he just thought, no, look, I mean, he's done perfectly well. And yeah, he has a pretty thick accent, no big deal. I'm looking here to see too that what I notice in the transits is that Saturn and Neptune will enter the 10th in 25, 26 in that range. And Jupiter, that's when Jupiter gets to the ascendant. So this is where and then of course it goes to the ascendant in between the summer of 25 and the summer of 26, then goes through his sun sign and his Leo planets. So I would surmise it's then that something perhaps important, I don't know, some kind of thing that would come in at that point in his life to highlight the power of those planets. Yeah,
it'll be interesting to see what it is.
Yeah. All right. Well, one final thing that I'll say, we didn't cover this, but notice that back to the chart itself, you see that the out of bounds planets. First of all, here you see that the pink ones are actually out of bounds, because out of bounds is considered after 2326, because 2326 is the northernmost or southernmost point of the sun. So it's planets that exceed that solar ecliptic trajectory. So Pluto was definitely out of bounds, and so was the moon. So already the moon being the ruler of the ascendant, that's going to make him extra ambitious, for example, right?
Right.
And Pluto, extra intense, extra committed, extra emotionally invested and all in type of energy. But then the Mars-Uranus, when I looked at the trajectory, these planets, they progressed into their out of bounds points and degrees, and indeed the Mars, which is, you could tag that mostly, at least at that age especially, but Mars and the physicality of the being a weightlifter, being a bodybuilder, that's Mars out of bounds. And I noticed that it was out of bounds approximately during the period when he was doing that, and then it went back in bounds when he stopped being as physically driven, which is, again, really graphic astrology, because you expect Mars being very muscular to manifest in that way.
Wow, that is interesting. Yeah.
All right, that was a fun discussion, and I look forward to the next one.
Sure.
All right.